Go ahead.
This is a test.
So's this.
Okay, today is April 25th, 2017. My name is Jeff Ringer, and I'm sitting here with Rob Lavenda, who is retiring from St. Cloud State University. This is his last week of classes, and I've asked him if I could conduct an oral history because of his extensive background in education abroad. And so let's begin.
All right.
So, Rob, you came here in 1979.
That's right.
Could you tell me a little bit about your background, your education background before you came to St. Cloud State?
Well, I grew up in northern New Jersey and went to Dartmouth as an undergraduate, where I majored in anthropology, and then went to Indiana University. I've been working my way west. So from Indiana University, I did field research in Venezuela, and then ran into a crash in the job market. The job market in academia has never been good, but it hasn't really recovered since the early 70s. But I managed, purely by chance, to get a one-year appointment at the University of Minnesota Morris. And that was in 1977-78. And while I was there, I took a group of students from UMM to Ecuador to study a variety of topics in Otavalo, Ecuador, in northern Ecuador. And that was a very successful program, and also was responsible for my getting hired at St. Cloud State. Because St. Cloud State had had a very small anthropology program at the time. There were 3 faculty members. And they put together a program, festival study program, research program for undergraduates to learn how to do field work in anthropology. And so the fact that I had taken a group of students to Ecuador on a field school was really attractive to my soon-to-be colleagues. So I got hired at St. Cloud State on a one-year appointment because it had been so late in the year that I was hired.
How did they find out about you?
Well, actually, at Morris or at St. Cloud State?
At St. Cloud.
I applied. There was
an
a
opening.
position open.
Okay.
There was an open position because Evelyn Hatcher was retiring.
Ah.
So I replaced her and just stayed.
So the first year was a temporary one-year
Position in 1979-80, and then in 1980 I got the tenure track position.
Okay. So when you were at the University of Minnesota Morris, you were there just for 1 year, and you organized an education
two
abroad.
years.
Oh, 2 years.
But in the first year I organized the study abroad, an education abroad program.
Is that common in anthropology departments?
No.
So
it's not uncommon for anthropology departments to have field schools. And particularly in archaeology. Cultural field schools are much less common. And it's even less common for them to be required. We require that our majors complete a field school, either archaeology or cultural anthropology. So when I got here, the program was in its infancy, and it had been basically Evelyn Hatcher and 3 or 4 students would go to different festivals every weekend, and they would try to look at public behavior. I figured that wasn't enough. I thought it was a topic worth researching, especially because when you come from northern New Jersey, Minnesota small-town festivals are really quite exotic. So that was the St. Cloud State deal. But the Morris one, a student had come to me and had asked me if I knew anything about how he could do some field work in the summer. And I got in touch with a friend of mine who was a Guatemalan folklorist, thinking that the student could go to Guatemala for the summer and work with this guy. And this guy said he was going to be in Otavalo, which is one of the most beautiful places in the entire world, and a place that I really wanted to go. I'd originally wanted to do my field work in Ecuador, in Otavalo. So I got in touch with my Guatemalan friend and suggested that this kid might come down and work with him. And then I had a better idea. Why not take a group of students so I could go too? So that's what we did. And that basically was really attractive to the faculty at St. Cloud State.
So earlier you used the phrase, we require students to do either a cultural or
archaeology field school.
A field school, okay. So is that, when you said we, is that St. Cloud State?
Yes.
Okay. Do they still require that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's probably common for anthropology departments.
Well, it's not that common for anthropology departments to have it required. In fact, I think we may be the only one in the country that requires students to do a field school. It's had a tremendous effect on our students. I mean, they actually leave St. Cloud State knowing how to do something, and having taken part in the most important act in anthropological methodology, which is field research, whether that's archaeology or cultural anthropology. It's sort of the heart of anthropology is collecting the information and the data from the way in which actual people live their actual everyday lives. So this has led to our students getting into graduate programs, it led to them getting interesting jobs. And when they're polled, our students always say that the field school was incredibly important for them in their future.
So you came to St. Cloud State in 1979. You had a one-year temporary position. Then a permanent position opened up. And so, what was your role in the department? You replaced someone who was retiring. Is that right?
Correct.
And so, did you take over her classes, or what? How would you describe your role? What you were teaching and your role in the department?
Well, I was hired to be a second cultural anthropologist. One of our colleagues really thought of himself more as a social anthropologist, more interested in social organization, and I was very interested in cultural sorts of things and anthropology and myth, magic, and religion, the anthropology of the arts, and ethnographic research itself. So that appealed to the department, or the program. We were part of the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Social Work in those days. And there were, as I say, I was the third anthropologist. I taught a lot of intro my first year, and then I taught the intermediate, what was then called intermediate cultural anthropology, which has become the ethnographic enterprise, a class about doing ethnography. And we do a lot of reading of ethnographies in that class. Then I taught the myth, magic, and religion for the first time, and that turned out to be wildly successful. And so I've taught it ever since.
And I know you've done some research on festivals throughout the years, because I've seen your posts online and so forth and so on. And so did that start because Evelyn was doing that before, or did you have an interest in that as well?
No, I was interested in carnivals, and in my fieldwork in Caracas, I was actually able to follow out some very interesting historical information about the celebration of Carnaval in Caracas, Venezuela, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. That was the other thing that attracted my application to St. Cloud State, was that I had this connection to festivals and this connection to field schools, so it was a perfect match.
So let's track your career in two different ways. So let's track it first from, how were there changes and both into the department structure, because I know you said it was a combined department, then at other times it wasn't, I believe. And so tell me a little bit about how your career, your teaching and the role in the department changed over the years.
Well, when I came to St. Cloud State, as I said, we were part of the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Social Work, and we were the smallest unit. And when I asked my soon-to-be colleagues, what the relationship was with the rest of the department, the response was benign neglect, which struck all of us as perfect, because we were free to do whatever we wanted to do, and we had a couple of courses that were shared. Our students took the sociological statistics course. Their students took our cultural anthropology course. Other than that, the three programs were completely separate. I mean, folklore, social work was completely independent in everything except name. And there were 5 sociologists, 12 sociologists, 5 social workers, and the 3 anthropologists. Social work wanted to break off in part because, for accreditation purposes, it made more sense to the accrediting agency that social work should be independent. So they went off on their own, and then we were too small to be an independent department. There were only 3 of us. We added a 4th faculty member in 1989-90, and she stayed a few years, but she wasn't really very comfortable at St. Cloud State. and didn't like the teaching very much. So she decided to pursue other interests and left at the end of the 90s. That was about the time that the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies got broken apart. And we got very lucky and hired Tom O'Toole from that program to teach part-time in anthropology and part-time in history. So he taught African history, African studies, cultural anthropology, and a few other things. And gradually we began to grow in terms of number of students, in terms of the attractiveness of our program. And then we had a dean, Ron Farrell, who was a sociologist, whose daughter was a cultural resources management archaeologist, who said to me at one point, I was the coordinator of the anthropology program. My colleagues didn't want to do it. They figured I could do it, so I did it. And so I met with the dean fairly regularly. We didn't attend Dean's Council, but we did. I did meet with him occasionally. And he thought that we should see about providing a CRM program. Deb Gold was already in the department, our archaeologist replacing Dick Lane, and she set to work to find out what made a really good CRM program. And she wrote a tremendous draft, which went all the way up through Minsky without any hesitation. So we needed to hire people, and we told the dean that we needed to hire a biological anthropologist before we hired any new archaeologists, because it's important in anthropology to understand that there are some people who see anthropology as four separate disciplines: biological anthropology, archaeological anthropology, linguistic anthropology, and cultural anthropology. And there are some people who see those four things as integrated. And those are called four-field anthropologists. And we've been a four-field anthropology program since the beginning. So we needed to have a four-field CRM program because of our commitment to the holistic nature of anthropology. And we convinced the dean that a biological anthropologist made the most sense. And then he set aside another position for us for the next year for someone to direct the CRM program, Cultural Resources Management. And so we hired, and then he left, but he left another position for us. But then we were, in a couple of years, we were ready to hire again, to hire a sixth anthropologist, I should say. And then the crash came. And the university put a hiring freeze on the week before our first candidate was supposed to arrive on campus. So we started the program with one director, and Deb Gold, and we had 4 students, all of whom had been SCSU alumni. But the program was so attractively designed and so reasonably priced that we began to attract lots of students from outside. And we now have students from all over the country, many of whom take the program as a distance learning program. It's a synchronous program, not an asynchronous program. You have to be available during the times the classes meet, and you check in with Adobe Connect. So by this point, we had 6 anthropologists, and we needed one more cultural anthropologist. And so we finally got permission to hire. And did so. We hired a cultural anthropologist, Kelly Branham, who's a specialist in American Indian issues and has a lot of experience working with archaeologists. So that's worked out perfectly. So now there's 7 of us, and I'm retiring, so there'll be 6. And we don't know yet when we'll hear about getting a replacement. But we went from 3 anthropologists to 7.
When did you start writing your textbook?
Well, we started in 1983, and the first edition came out in 86, 87, and was reasonably successful, so it went into a second edition, and then a third edition. And then the publisher, West Publishing, decided that they were really in the mood for blockbusters, and we were not a blockbuster.
Yeah.
So they set us free. And we found an ideal publisher, Mayfield Publishing. And they were interested in a four-field book as well as a regular cultural anthropology book. So Emily Schultz and I decided that we could probably write a four-field book, so we did.
So the other one wasn't?
No, the other one was a cultural anthropology text. And the four-field book did pretty well also, but it was very long because most four-field books in anthropology are cultural anthropology books that got bulked up. So you have a 25-chapter book, which you can't cover even in a semester these days. So we had 3 editions of the four-field book, and then we revised it so significantly that our editor decided that it was a new book. So it was renamed and reorganized, and instead of 25 chapters, we had 16, which is much more doable in a semester.
And so you've continued with that?
We've continued with that one, and then we also, our editor suggested that we might be interested in writing a very short book that was just key terms that could be used in departments where a lot of ethnographies are assigned, but the students need some sort of organizational structure to figure out why these people are writing these things. And so this little book of ours has been quite successful. So our cultural anthropology text just went into its 10th edition. The four-field book is in production for its 4th edition. And the little book, Core Concepts in Cultural Anthropology, is in its 6th edition.
Wow.
And the cultural book has been translated into Japanese, Vietnamese, Italian, Bulgarian, Romanian, and Macedonian.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
Great. Yeah, good. You're going to continue working on those after you retire?
Absolutely. I'll actually have time to do it.
Okay, so now let's switch over to, well, I guess before we switch over, so has your teaching pretty much hasn't changed throughout your career, and you're still doing?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've taught a lot of introductory anthropology, and I love teaching that course. I find it really exciting to get students interested in anthropology.
Is that a large section?
Sections of 50. Well, the sections have ranged from 30 to 500, and we've tried all sorts of approaches. And we even tried the edutainment and decided that wasn't really sufficient. So we went back to smaller sections, and now we have 4 or 5 sections of 50 students. There are certain things that I've taught regularly. The ethnographic enterprise I taught every year. Myth, Magic, and Religion I taught every 3 semesters. The Anthropology and the Arts class, which was a particularly interesting one to me, I would teach every couple of years. I think I've taught a total of 12 different classes, which when you're a small department you end up doing.
Okay. Well, now let's switch over to education abroad and study abroad. So I know that you've been crucial, or you've been extremely involved in the Latin American Studies program, but you also spent time working on the International Studies Committee, Education Abroad Committee for the general programs, because you were part of the committee that interviewed me when I was selected to teach in Denmark.
Oh, that's right. That was a long time ago.
It was a long time. I remember that. So tell me a little bit about all of that.
Well, when I came to St. Cloud State, the then director of international programs had a lifeboat approach to study abroad. His idea was you take a bunch of people, you make sure they have no preparation whatsoever, and then you throw them in a lifeboat and you see who survives and how they have to organize themselves to survive, which is one approach to international studies, but it's not one that anthropologists find particularly attractive. So fortunately, he left, went off to Wisconsin, and had a very successful career there. But he was of the opinion that any department that wanted to get involved with orientation for study abroad programs was really just in it to feather its own nest and try to attract students into their field. So he wouldn't let us help with the orientation. So when he left, we we were able to help with the orientation. And we discovered that there was a lot, that anthropology had a lot to contribute to how you deal with being abroad. And that's not surprising. Anthropologists have been going abroad since the end of the 19th century. I joined the Latin American Studies Committee when I arrived at St. Cloud State. I mean, my dissertation had been about Venezuela, and I had done a lot of reading and a lot of classwork in Latin America, and I spoke pretty good Spanish. And at the time that I came on to the committee in 1980 or 81, the then director was talking about starting a study abroad program in Mexico. Well, I had kept in touch with friends at the University of Minnesota Morris, and the summer after we did our Ecuador program, they did a program in Mexico, in Guadalajara. 2 of the students got busted for being in a car with guys with lots of marijuana in the trunk. We think it might have been a setup. In any event, they were arrested, and my colleague had to hurry around. Fortunately, he had a lot of experience in Mexico, and he asked if there was a fine that we might pay to help them out. Yes, of course, he said, $1,000. So
at that time, that was a heck of a lot of money.
That was a tremendous amount of money. No one was carrying that kind of money, but everybody chipped in, and he had to get her on the first bus from Guadalajara to Mexico City and on the first plane that was going anywhere to the U.S. And I figured, who needed that? Let's not go to Mexico. Let's go to Costa Rica, which is peaceful and has no army and is beautiful to boot and doesn't have a lot of international studies programs. So a small group of us went to Costa Rica, met with their director of international programs. We hit it off and started the program in Costa Rica. And that was in 1984, I think, we sent our first faculty member and student group.
Now, you mentioned that there was already a Latin American Studies committee or group when you arrived, but they didn't have a program abroad.
Correct. It was just a few years old, and they were starting to think about, basically what they did was they had a team-taught course in Latin America that was a general ed course. And that's mostly what they did. But gradually more and more people with on-the-ground experience in Latin America were being hired. And so the interests of the Latin American Studies Committee began to shift. So we kept doing the Costa Rica program. I directed it in 1994, took my son with me. Did wonderful things for his Spanish and his sense of being abroad and the importance of being able to move from culture to culture in the kind of cosmopolitan way. I directed the program in 94, and we kept on with the program. It was terrific when we were on quarters because we would have a director from the foreign language, from Spanish, in the first semester, from January through March. And then the second quarter, or the third quarter at St. Cloud State, spring quarter, was the director who came from Latin American Studies. And so the students got a really interdisciplinary mix of Spanish language classes and literature classes and Latin American Studies classes. So that was a very successful model, which got destroyed when we went to semesters. We could never really figure out a way to do that. And what happened was that the faculty who were interested in going to Costa Rica had all gone several times. And it was increasingly difficult to put together a sequence of faculty members who were interested in going. Costa Rica was changing a lot also. It was tourism was becoming increasingly important. Street safety was becoming less secure. One of our colleagues was actually mugged right outside the Ed building on the San Jose side of the street, not the university side of the street. But he was mugged nonetheless, and you could hear English a lot because there were so many tourists. So one of our colleagues said that he thought we should revisit the location. And he had recently been to Chile. And we realized that in 1998 and 1999, there were really only two stable countries in Latin America, Chile and Costa Rica. We were leaving one, so we figured we'd go to the other. And Elaine Carter, Elaine Davis, Chuncheng Zhang, and I went to two cities in Chile. We went to Temuco, which is far in the south, and we went to Concepcion. Both looked like reasonable places to have a program. We had decided ahead of time that we were not going to go to Santiago because the capital city is so intense, such an intense environment, that our students really needed a place where they could feel comfortable instead of having to be hassled all the time. So that's why we went to why we didn't look in Santiago. But we found a partner, we thought, at the University of Temuco, but they decided that they really couldn't manage in a study abroad program at that point. Concepcion was very interested, and so we signed an agreement with the University of Concepcion that they would receive a director and several students, that they would provide a couple of courses. Our director would teach a couple of courses. A very conventional kind of study abroad or education abroad program. That began to change when Omar Salazar, who was a Spanish professor, who was very interested in how people learn languages, had been working with the audiology program at the University of Concepcion and teaching linguistics for them. And he looked at our catalog and saw that we had a communication sciences and disorders department that offered a course that they wanted but didn't have anyone who could teach. So he proposed that they send a group of students to St. Cloud State with a director. And that's what we did. And so from that beginning, this multimodal kind of program began to develop, where we would send students and faculty, and they would send students and faculty. And gradually, we began to move away from the conventional model of study abroad and into a much more cooperative relationship. It was successful because we treated our Chilean colleagues as equals, and they treated us as equals. And so we were able to work very effectively in a whole variety of departments. We've had programs with audiology, nursing, cardiology, Spanish, English, teaching English as a second language, anthropology, sociology, political science.
So are you saying that they've sent different professors from
Yes.
their university here?
Yeah, they've sent faculty from anthropology and sociology, psychology, Spanish language and literature. Let's see. I think those are the faculty that they've sent who've taught.
And so you said it was successful because we treated each other equally. So what does that mean? You mean in terms of receiving from both ends?
Well, yes, in terms of receiving from both ends, but also, at least as interestingly, in how you actually deal with the other university.
So give me an example of what a university might do that wouldn't be treating each other equally.
Well, the dean of the sociologist who was the chair of the department when I arrived, and later became the dean of social sciences, had a lot of experience in Germany. In fact, he had a Ph.D. from Germany. And he said that they had a lot of cooperative ventures with the Germans, but you always knew who was the senior partner, because they were the ones who were the German academics. And a number of American universities treat their study abroad partners in a similar sort of way, that we're the big experts. We're the ones who know. We're the ones who get the grants, who do the big research, and we have our Latin American colleagues to be to provide us with assistance. Well, we don't do that. We feel that our colleagues at the University of Concepcion are our colleagues, and we treat them the way we expect to be treated ourselves. And that's been very successful because the University of Concepcion is the 3rd ranked university in Chile, the 12th ranked university in Latin America. And it's a major doctoral granting institution. It's like us in a number of ways. That is to say, they have a tremendous number of students who are first-generation college students. They have the most number of students who get assistance from the government. They're located outside the main city of the country or the state, and they struggle for money, and we struggle for money. So and we have a lot of very interesting and excellent faculty, and so do they. And we have students who really appreciate what they are getting, and so do they.
So is this continued?
Oh yeah, the program's going on. Omar Salazar will be here tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
And I've often said that what I'd really like the relationship of the two universities to be is that when you're walking across campus, on either campus, you run into people you know from Chile or from the United States. And that happens. I met a lot of very interesting people, including the doctor who's the head of pediatric intensive care. And I was trying to get a hold of him, and there he was walking across campus, and he was just amazed to see me because he hadn't realized I was arriving. And the same is true with Chilean faculty whom we found here at St. Cloud State who happened to show up. So it's a very nice kind of relationship. And we have administrators who are very supportive on both sides, and that makes a huge difference also.
So you used to be, from what I understand, there used to be a Latin American Studies Committee, and that had members of different departments on the committee, and that was the committee that made decisions as to who was going to go
Yes.
to Chile at a particular time. Does that still operate?
No.
How does it then? How are decisions made now?
Decisions are made. We were when we did the what do we call it? The international visioning document. We proposed that there should be for strategic partners a binational committee. So we put together a binational committee that meets once or twice a year via Adobe Connect. Or by Skype, and that makes decisions in regard to the program. In 2008, all of the programs that had been director-led programs were canceled because of the university budget crisis. And so now, instead of sending a director, we just send the students, and Omar Salazar acts as our interests.
Since 2008.
Yeah. And so since 2008, students have been going by themselves. They have a fantastic time. They still take a couple of courses that are just for them. But now they can take any course they're interested in at the University of Concepcion. So we've had students take anthropology classes, political science classes, volleyball classes. It's been a very successful program.
So then the Latin American Studies Committee model stopped when the Costa Rica program stopped?
No, it stopped in 2008, which was already 7 years into the Chile program.
Okay, so it stopped after that. Okay, because that was a successful model for a long time, I think.
Yeah, well, the only problem is that it becomes very expensive very quickly because the costs of the faculty director have to be absorbed by the students.
Right.
And it takes a faculty member out of St. Cloud State's rotation. And it also means that the students don't really get as much connection to the local culture and the local university culture as they would if they were on their own.
But I would imagine that there are fewer students who go on their own than when there's a faculty-led program.
You're absolutely right. You guessed
It's
correctly.
a trade-off.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
We've had as few as 2 and as many as 6.
Well, my question was geared toward the fact that I think that the decision-making model that you had with the international or the Latin American Studies Committee, consisting of people from different disciplines, is one that other units on this campus should be aware of and should remember, because I think that worked successfully for many years, right? It was that was for 20-some years. Did that.
No, that's right. We started in 1984 and ended in 2008.
8.
Well, the committee ended and stopped doing that.
Oh, okay.
Well, we stopped having a director. Oh, you're talking about the director model or the governance model?
The governance model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That works very well. And there are two. It seemed to me that there are two ways of approaching that. One is to say that anybody who's interested and has some expertise is welcome to serve on the committee. The other way of doing that is to say any department that participates in the program has a right to a seat on the committee.
Do you have a preference for one of those?
Well, I thought I had a preference for the former model. Anybody who's interested should be on the committee. But that can lead to some unusual arrangements, such as the entire Spanish language section feeling that they should be on the committee. And perfectly reasonably, they all have a connection to Latin America and to the language that's spoken and to the capacity of the students to learn the language and how they're learning it and what they're learning. On the other hand, it also gives them a power block that they could that they could use if they chose to direct the program in ways that other members of the committee would not favor. And that would be true of any department that was contributing a substantial number of faculty.
Right. So which of those models did we have?
We had both.
It changed over time.
We started out with any department that contributes somebody to Latin American Studies 250, when it was a team-taught course, had a right to a seat. And that meant that Dick Lane, who was our archaeologist who taught the Mesoamerican archaeology class, was on the committee when I arrived, but he wasn't particularly interested in getting off that committee, sort of enjoyed it. And I was interested in getting on the committee. And so the committee agreed that made sense to have somebody who was just back from Latin America should be on the committee. So it began to change in that way. And then when I became director of Latin American Studies, I recommended that we invite anybody who was interested in Latin America to serve on the committee, and that worked out rather well for a long time.
Good. So let's talk next about. So let's move to your involvement on the International Studies Committee, apart from just the Latin American Studies program. So you were a member of the committee for at least a short period of time, and maybe longer.
A long period of time.
A long period of time. Okay. So what were your thoughts about how that committee operated?
Well, a long time ago, I thought that it wasn't that it was too narrow in its focus. It saw itself as the ANIC and the Aalborg selection committee. But it seemed to me that we needed some coherence to our international programs, and we needed to be able to make decisions. Now, I realize that historically St. Cloud State faculty have avoided making decisions of that kind. We feel that these are administrative, or the administration certainly feels like it's their right. But the faculty has also felt that we don't have an all-campus tenure committee, for example, which most universities have, so that tenure decisions go from the department to the dean. They don't go to an intervening committee that is a university-wide committee. So that any decision-making on personnel issues is handed over to the administration. That was also the case with the International Studies Committee, because we would make recommendations for faculty, but we wouldn't make recommendations on programs particularly. And so somebody who wanted to run a program in Prague for the music department simply went to the dean or went to the academic vice president and said, this is what I'd like to do, or went to the director of international studies and said, how can we do this? But there wasn't any coherence to that, because it was whoever showed up at your office first got the benefit.
Hmm.
So I was on the International Studies Committee for a long time and was sort of pushing to have some hand in how these programs were established. And this was not a popular choice. I mean, the ANIC, and particularly the Aalborg faculty, felt that that was their program. It wasn't a university program. It was an Aalborg faculty program.
Hmm.
The faculty who participated in it.
Oh.
And they didn't want the committee messing around with it.
When you say the Aalborg faculty, not the host, not the faculty in Denmark, but
no, the U.S.
SS. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
People who had
Been there.
Been there.
Okay.
And they had a point that if you haven't been there, you don't know what it's like, but you also have some sense of how you build an international program. And that could be shared knowledge. That's not simply one set of people know about that.
So what was working well on the International Studies Committee and what wasn't working well?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I remember. I mean, I think we picked interesting people to go. And those people who went had extraordinary experiences. People had extraordinary experiences and actually managed to transform their careers in many cases. I mean, you spent a lot of time abroad as a consequence of your having been in Aalborg, and that has made all the difference in your career and your life as well, I suspect.
It did. It did.
So that's one of the things that the International Studies Committee can be proud of. I think that directing how programs develop, how programs get approved, is something that the International Studies Committee should have had more to do with. Now it's basically working with short-term programs, short-term faculty-led programs. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it still leads to a certain amount of incoherence.
Hmm. So talk a little bit more about that coherence. Like, what would that coherence look like?
Well, I think that part of what it would look like was that the university wouldn't have perhaps as many programs, but they would be deeper.
Mm. Deeper in the sense of more time?
Deeper in the sense of more time, deeper in the sense of
connection to programs?
Connection to programs and connections to the host university or to the host country.
Mm.
Right now we have the short-term programs barely touch on the country. They certainly have academic content to them, but they're short. They're led by a faculty director. We're not receiving students from that university here. In many cases, it's not even a university. There's not even a university connection. And I think there should be. I think that we should be working with university partners to enhance the educational opportunities of all the students, not simply our students. Hmm. Now, of course, not every student in Europe wants to come to the United States to study. They can go to Italy, they can go to the UK, they can go to Germany without paying any more, particularly, I think, than they would if they stayed at their home university. But there are enough who'd be interested in coming to the United States, and there are plenty in Latin America and in Asia who come to the United States.
Although many want to study in California.
I can't imagine why. The Asian programs are interesting because we get a lot of Asian students here, but we don't send a lot of students to Asia. Hmm. And I think that we should try to figure out a way to do that. So that's what I meant by deep, Jeff, okay. in that. And if a university is particularly strong in something, then maybe we should develop a program that plays on the strengths of both universities. The perfect example of this is the audiology or CDS system arrangement that we have, because the Fonoaudiología department at the University of Concepcion is a very strong department. Audiology is maybe the third most difficult program to get into at the University of Concepcion, with medicine and dentistry being the first two, and then followed by audiology and nursing. But it's a very demanding program, and we have an excellent program as well that's recognized internationally. So we work together, and that has been a very successful partnership. Small, but very effective. We have to deal with the language difference also, and that leads to a number of difficulties, because Latin American students are more likely to have studied English than U.S. students are to have studied Spanish. So finding students who can deal with the language use in a lecture course is much more difficult for us than it is for Concepcion.
Do you have any other advice for international programs at St. Cloud State beyond what you've suggested already?
Yeah, I think that they should emphasize semester-long programs or even year-long programs. And that's one of the things that really has struck me over the years, is that students are much less likely to go abroad for an entire semester. And if they go abroad, they'll go on a short-term faculty-led program that doesn't have the kinds of connections into the society. I mean, in Concepcion, our students go for the whole semester and they live with a family.
They live with families.
Yeah, so that gives them an understanding of the intimacies of everyday life in Chile that they would never get, and vice versa. I had a Chilean host parent tell me that he had that having this woman student living in his house with his two sons gave him the idea that he had been perhaps too rigid in raising his boys, and that he should allow them a little more freedom, because she came from a place where there was much more freedom for high school and college age kids, and he saw that it worked, and it made her much more independent than his boys were. So he was affected by that. Another parent told me that he'd never liked Americans. He'd never met one, but he never liked them. And meeting these students was something that was really so valuable to him, because it completely changed his mind about American students and about Americans more generally, North Americans. So that kind of connection that really does transform your life in a way that a 3-week SCSU director-led program doesn't, is really significant. And you can say all you want that students will go again, but they don't. They go on one trip, and maybe a couple of them will go on.
Yeah.
But not very many.
Not very many. I heard those same stories from the parents in Denmark. Our students didn't necessarily live with them, but they were assigned a host family, and the same kinds of things I heard. Yeah, it's fascinating. It really demonstrates the power of the international programs.
Well, I mean, people's daily habitus is so different that you suddenly realize that culture is learned, and that there are lots of ways of getting through life, and that our way isn't the only way, and that it's entertaining to sit at the table for an hour after dinner talking with people and arguing with people and listening to people. That's fun. And our students would admit to that. They would say, one of my students in 2002, when I directed the program, said that she had more conversations with her host family in 2 months than she'd had with her natural family in 2 years. And I think that's true, because her parents both worked shift jobs, and the kids would come home to find a pot of something on the stove, and then they would go out to softball practice or basketball practice or choir practice or whatever it was, and they would barely see their regular family. In Chile, everybody in Concepcion, most people go home for lunch. The university closes from 12 to 3. And the there are no classes from 12 to 3 because everybody goes home. And you talk about what you did during the day and what you're planning to do in the afternoon. And you listen to your grandparents talk about the old days and how important that was. And this is a really significant part of Chilean life. It's called entremesa, and people are always involved with each other and their families in ways that is less likely in the United States.
I just returned from South Africa. I went on the 2-week
Right.
spring break program, and one of the directors of the international programs there mentioned the same thing that Shahzad has mentioned here, that it's harder and harder to get students to go on a semester-long program, and they seem to want, sometimes for the cost, they seem to want the short-term programs.
Well, I think it's cost and I think it's fear. I think some people don't like to confront the reality of difference. And if they go away and part of it is that they don't want to miss things, and they have jobs that they might not get back if they go away for an entire semester. Their boss isn't willing to let them go for an entire semester. The boss perfectly legitimately needs someone now, not in 16 weeks. Not going to hire somebody to substitute in a retail job. So I think that's part of it, but I think it's also I think it is fear, a fear of the unknown. And students, unless they're taught from the beginning of their university career that the expectation is that you'll go abroad, that you'll confront this difference, that you'll try to make awkward connections across difference, that you'll learn about difference. But we're not that interested in difference anymore. We're interested in similarity.
How many of the anthropology students go abroad?
Not very many of
Not very
them.
many.
There's some who do, but we've never really forced them to do it. And part of it is that, some of them have gone on the South Africa program because of the language. We don't require that they study another language, but if you're going to go to Concepcion, you've got to have Spanish. You can't. We made it that way. You can't go to Concepcion as only an English speaker because your host family doesn't speak English. In 2002, in December, it suddenly dawned on me that I hadn't heard any English on the street at all. I was walking around town, and I suddenly heard someone speaking English, and I said, "Wait a minute! I haven't heard this since August."
So let's shift back to the other side of the equation, to just the academics and your experience at St. Cloud State. What are some of the changes that have happened to St. Cloud State, and maybe your department, the college, that were the most striking to you?
Well, there are a number of different things that strike me. One is that in a certain way, very little has changed. The students continue to be really wonderful. The best thing about the place are the students. I used to say, and I still believe, that it's exciting to watch the light go on. If you teach at a place like McAllister, the light's been on since kindergarten. But at St. Cloud State, we get students who've been told over and over again that they're not college material, that they're not really very smart, that they can't think very well, and why are they wasting everybody's time and money going to the university? They should just get a job. Those are the students for whom the light goes on, who turn out to be fantastic students, who turn out to be fascinated by the material. You just have to reach them. When I first went to Morris in 1977, the guy I was replacing someone who was on sabbatical, and his comment was that the students at Morris were probably about as smart as the students he'd had at Berkeley when he was a TA at Berkeley. But the difference was that they could go as far as the Berkeley students could, but you had to take them there every step. But they could get there. And that's true. I found that to be absolutely the best piece of advice I got for teaching, is that don't assume that the students can't do this. They can do it. You have to show them how to do it, perhaps. You have to model that behavior. You have to show them how to work the equations, how to interpret social behavior. But once they figure that out, they can go as far as any students can. There's no doubt about that. That hasn't changed. What's changed is the cybernetic revolution. There were no computers except big things with card readers when I started at Morris. And when I started at St. Cloud State, I mean, we didn't get our first desk computers until about 1986 or 87, I think. And smartphones have taken over the world, and that's not having a good effect on students. Students can't. I was particularly nice to them this year and didn't insist, but ordinarily I've insisted that they not use their smartphones in class, and they don't listen. They still use them.
Yeah.
They can't not do it. Well, this destroys your concentration because you're constantly looking down and reading your message or looking at the joke and trying not to laugh out loud, checking your texts, watching movies. This is unfortunate because the lack of concentration means that the students aren't really paying attention to what they should be learning in the class. Learning is hard. It's not easy. And just because we're studying human beings doesn't mean that we automatically understand what's going on. So the smart media has had, in some ways, a very positive effect in that you're open to the world and you can find things out very easily, and you can learn from Wikipedia or from other sources about the world. But we all know what the other side of smart media is, and how people only surround themselves with information that makes sense to them. But what I'm concerned about is the attention span and thinking through how things work. Students in 1979 were just as eager to be amused and attracted away from boring lectures, but it was much more difficult to do because you had to make believe that you were paying attention. And the smartphone revolution means that there's an infinity of information available to you at any time. And somebody's getting in touch with you, so you check your texts. It's really hard not to do. Administrators do it. Faculty do it. So why shouldn't students do it? Because we don't want them to, because we want them to pay attention to what we're saying or to what the ideas that we're playing with are. Students don't write as well as they used to either. They were never great writers, but they could write a five paragraph essay when I came here. And now that's much more difficult. And some of my colleagues have suggested that this is the consequence of the No Child Left Behind generation that we now have as our students. They're very good at answering multiple choice tests, but they're terrible at writing essays. And this is really a problem, not because you have to write essays when you get out of college, but because essays teach you how to think in a particular kind of way. And if you're not doing that, then you're not getting the benefit of the education that you're paying for, and that's building up to such a degree in your loan balances. So that's a problem. And it used to be that you could tell very quickly in a student essay who had had the introductory English class and who hadn't. And that's much less the case now. And it may be because they're not paying attention in their composition class either. Or it might be that they're taking it much later in their college careers. Or the English department isn't doing as good a job as they used to. I mean,
or they're taking it somewhere else and transferring it in. That's a huge issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's another whole discussion for us to have if we want. But certainly, I think that's a particularly significant difference. But in terms of sort of innate qualities, they're right. They're still fascinating students, and they can do fantastic work. But we have to help them.
You're retiring. This is your last week of classes. Do you have any parting advice for the university?
Yeah, I do, actually. There are two different things that I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about time and how fast time moves, and how as you get older it moves faster. I'm in my 60s. Time is the years between turning 60 and how old I am now have gone by faster than any years in my life. And the 50s went almost as fast, and the 40s slower. But time goes, and we don't appreciate it. We don't stop. We don't know how to pay attention outside of the moment, and yet we need to do that because you have no choice. There's only one life, and you might as well appreciate it when you've got it, and not simply be concerned with the trivialities of daily life. The other thing I've been thinking about is the whole issue of rigor and quality. If the university gives up its emphasis on excellence, we've got nothing left. Nothing. We need, no matter how desperate our financial condition, we cannot cut back on the quality of the programs that we offer, because then we're finished. The idea of the university is based on excellence, is based on demanding work, is based on not losing track of the main lines of thinking. And that's why people come here. They come here because of the quality of the institution. And if our financial exigencies make that difficult for them to get the quality that they need, they won't come. And we will have given up the currency that's most valuable. That's what I've been thinking about.
Great. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Jeff.
This has been an hour and 20 minutes with Rob Lavenda, last year at St. Cloud State.